Hi, everybody. This is Melissa, um, and I am thankful to be here today. I wanted to talk with you guys about something that I feel like the Lord put on my heart. Um, it is that looks can be deceiving. Um, Last week in our group, I posted some pictures, and those are pictures of me. And I wanted to talk about those. I didn't just post them to be pictures of me. I wanted to talk about what's happening in those pictures. I am trying to record a screenshot of those pictures as I talk about this so that they will be available so that people will understand what I'm talking about. Um, so, when I look at those pictures, I see something probably very different than maybe what you see. They are both nice pictures. I am smiling in both pictures, but those pictures were taken at very different times in my life. That top picture was taken on a day that we actually had family pictures scheduled. So my hair was done, my makeup was done, um, but what you can't see in that top picture is that I actually took that while I was inebriated um, and quite intoxicated. I do remember taking the picture, um, and I remember the post that I made uh, about that picture. I felt good about myself that day, um, but more importantly, I really took that picture and posted that picture that day, sort of to prove to myself that I had it all together, that everything was going fine, that I was happy. And it was sort of a post, a picture taken and a post made in an effort to prove that I was okay, which could not have been further from the truth. This picture was taken a couple of months before my life blew up. And excuse me. Um, yeah, so when I look at that picture, um, on the surface, it looks like a decent, just normal picture, but I know what's underneath it. And for those of you that are just joining live, you may remember that I posted in our group two pictures. Those are both pictures of myself. But I was just saying how when I look at those pictures, they represent two very different things in my life. That top picture that I took was taken about 2 months before my life blew up. And that picture was taken on a day that our family had scheduled to have family photos made. And I remember the post that went along with that picture. That picture and the post was intended to speak to the people in my life on Facebook that I had it all together and that all was well in my life. Um, and that really could not have been further from the truth. As I said a minute ago, I was intoxicated in that photograph. I do remember taking the picture. I wasn't that inebriated. But the truth is, I couldn't have smiled and made it look like I had it all together at that time in my life without alcohol. And so the purpose of today is not just to talk about me or my pictures. The purpose is really to say that looks can be deceiving. That top picture, if you just looked at it on the surface, like maybe as you see that picture, you think, oh, that's just a picture of Melissa. She looks happy in that picture. She's smiling and her hair is done. She's got her makeup on. All is well. But that's just not what was happening in my life. And then when I look at the bottom picture, again, it's a nice picture. It's a picture of me. And the difference when I look at that bottom picture is that it was about, I want to say it was about 3 years after I became sober. And when I look at that picture, it really is the first time that I felt comfortable being that vulnerable. And that might sound silly, but I had gotten really comfortable with hiding in my life. And of course, I did not want photographs of myself. Most of them would have revealed some pretty unsavory things, and I didn't want that photographed. So the bottom picture for me represents a time in my life when I really was happy. I was sober. And I did feel like I had it together. That's not to say that there was perfection, because I am still healing from a lot of things from my past. So I really wanted to talk with you guys today about how looks can be deceiving. If you look at those photographs, again, you may see just two decent pictures of a person, and in both of those photographs, I look happy. But happiness is not about what you're seeing on the outside. It is truly about what is happening in the heart of a person. And as this relates to your spouse or even you as you're standing, we can put on the happy face. We can make it appear like we have it all together. But you're the one that goes to sleep at night with you. And your spouse is the one that goes to sleep at night with themselves. And only they or only you know deep down if there's peace. And there's a difference between having it together on the outside and things appearing to be one way, and things actually being solid and peaceful. So really, that's what I wanted to talk with you guys about today. So, going back to those photographs, like the Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And I think that represents how I felt about myself. That could be negative or positive. That could be full of Jesus or not full of Jesus. It's still a truth, right? So during that time in my life when, I used alcohol to cope with my life, I did that. And I know we've talked about this before, but I did that because I I could not find peace just inside of myself. And alcohol provided me with the ability to um, just kind of shut down thinking about that stuff, and the fact that I didn't have peace and that there was no fulfillment or purpose in my life. Um, and so that scripture is true. I was filled with so much shame and baggage and just not being a healed person with purpose and truth guiding my life. And as a result of that, um, I used alcohol to cope with that. It certainly took over in a way that I could never have imagined. And I think that probably some of you may have experienced that as you're walking through relationship with your spouse, or maybe other people in your life that are struggling with addiction. Um, it it sort of becomes something that you're like, no way, this cannot be happening like this. Um, and don't they see what's going on? The truth is that when you're lost in that, you really don't see the destruction. There isn't logic applied to that. You don't see the destruction that you're causing. And the easiest thing to do is to just deflect and blame your problems on other people and not take any responsibility. Um, and so when you do have lucid moments, when you are present and not currently using or high or drunk or whatever, excuse me, you think about those things, and that unrest and that unpeace that exists is so much pressure. It is so much pressure. And so the easy thing to do, this is the wrong way to use this word, but the logical thing to do is to numb. because that's how you're used to coping. So I know that's extremely difficult because from the outside, it's logical to look at it. If you are not muted, would you please mute your mic? The logical, or from the outside, we can look at it and see that, somebody is making a choice to be destructive by using whatever the substance is, whatever the distraction is. And I really do prefer to think of them as distractions, though I know that it's more than just a distraction. I really do see it as a distraction to purpose, a distraction to identity, a distraction to who God made a person to be. And we're going to talk about that in a second, about how addiction is a symptom. But yeah, your thought process is, I've learned to cope with this by using or drinking or whatever, and I'm going to continue to do that because it quiets the monsters, because I don't know another way. I don't know how to make this unrest that exists inside of me stop existing. So if I can't make it stop existing, because it feels like it's a part of who I am, it's a part of how I was made. That's how it feels. If you guys don't know that, that's exactly how it feels. That it's just kind of part of who you are and how you were made. It feels impossible to ever get out of. And this is not to be discouraging to you. It's to really maybe open your eyes to what it feels like, or how a person who's walking in active addiction is processing their everyday life. And you, again, may think you can look at this from the outside and think they're making this choice. And I can just tell you, I was talking with somebody recently about this, who also is sober, and there's something unique about being able to connect with another person who is now also free from that, because there are things that I don't have to explain to people who have walked through it. They understand. And so what I said to this person was that it really doesn't feel like a choice. It really doesn't feel like a choice. What I said to this person was that if I could decide not to go to the store to purchase alcohol, if I could decide not to open the first can, and that's a humongous if I could decide to do that, then maybe I could escape it for that day. But if I got in the car and went to the store, if I opened the first beer, it was over. It did not feel like a choice. And I'm not saying in any way that you have to just accept the poor choices that come along with that. But what I am saying is that inside the mind of a person who is stuck in, lost in, feeding in to addiction, it absolutely does not feel like a choice. You might as well be saying to them, well, gosh, couldn't you just stop breathing? Because that's how important it feels. And of course, I know on this side of freedom that it's absolutely possible to not have that as a part of my life. I am sober. I am coping with life and some very challenging circumstances, even recently, without drinking, without indulging in that, without being called or feeling pressured or struggling with the thought of I should be, I could just go and drink and then I would feel better. So I know it's possible to do that, but when you're lost in that and there's all of this unhealed trauma and all of this unrest inside of you, and then on top of that, you're disappointing your family, you're disappointing your spouse, you're disappointing your children. Maybe you can't even hold together reasonably enough to function decent at a job. So your finances are in jeopardy. Like there's all of these things. And yes, they are a result of your poor choices. But I'm just making the point that it doesn't, when you're lost in that, it does not feel like a choice that you're making to destroy your life. It feels like You must cope. And the only way to cope, the only way to get through that is to feed that monster. It's a lie. And I know that. And I'm sure that you know that. But it feels like it's the truth. And so I know we have talked before about what I believe are two of the main causes for a person who is snared and trapped in addiction, and that is unhealed trauma. So all of the things that have happened in their life, whether it was from their childhood or their young adult life or some other major traumatic event that has occurred in their life that they cannot come to terms with, and that has spoken so loudly over their lives that they've believed untruths about themselves, about their character, about their nature, about their safety, about their ability to trust people. And it defines who you are when you live with that stuff for long enough. And it just speaks so loudly to what you can expect about your life. Because it's unhealed, and it's like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop constantly. And when that kind of mindset is present, now I know that we all have gone through things in our childhood. Our parents were certainly not perfect. And I'm not saying that every person that experiences that copes with it through addiction, but many do. Absolutely many do. And until those things are addressed and healed, worked through. And the way that I think of that, honestly, is, and I've been in regular counseling sessions for almost 2 years now, and I've attended other counseling on a regular basis for years now, until I learned that I had believed negative things about me as a result of the choices of other people in my life, specifically in my childhood. The trauma that I experienced, and it was absolutely abusive, neglectful, dysfunctional, uncaring, CPS should have been called stuff. But nobody in my life as a child stood up for me. Excuse me. Nobody protected me. Nobody kept the chaos from happening to me or around me. Even if it wasn't directly affecting me, it certainly was trickle down affecting me. And those things just caused me to believe some really awful things about myself. And those things identified me. I learned how to navigate life in fear, always thinking that those things were going to continue to happen. And even if I grew up and outgrew someone's power over me to do those things to me, it was still a recognition that I was a powerless person who was just waiting for bad things to happen. And maybe your spouse has experienced some of those things. Maybe they weren't as bad. There's no grading scale here to say, well, it wasn't that bad. Listen, trauma is trauma. And if a person is negatively affected by experiences that happen, especially when they are children and young, those things speak so loudly about what they can expect for life. And when you cannot resolve that, and sometimes that's about not being able to forgive people who intentionally hurt you, abused you, took advantage of you. And sometimes it's just that you were witness to things that happened maybe in other adults, parents, adults, whatever. And you felt powerless and helpless. And if you you can grow chronologically, you can grow in age, but that doesn't change the negative beliefs that you grabbed onto about yourself. And so then you take that into young adulthood and marriage. And now you've got all these pressures from just life, because life is stressful, right? I mean, maintaining a job and being married and having children and all of that. We all go through stressful stuff, and most people are able to cope with that without developing unhealthy habits. But when you come from a background of having all of that trauma and all of those negative beliefs, you can think you put all that stuff behind you, right? But those new experiences, which are probably somewhat normal experiences of adulthood, begin to start pressing those buttons, those triggers from childhood or young adulthood or that trauma that you experienced. And you, without even realizing it, start to think, oh my gosh, oh, it's happening again. Oh, that's right. This is what I believe. This is who I am. This is the truth. And it's all garbage. But your mind does not know that. Your body does not know that. I cannot tell you how many times I've had, something that my counselor and I talk about is the fact that she constantly asks me, where are you feeling this in your body? As we're processing memories and replacing the lies and the negative beliefs with truth, she will stop me in that process and say, where are you feeling this in your body? And I have to recognize in that moment, oh my gosh, my shoulders, like I'm holding that so tightly. I'm clenching so tightly in my shoulders. It's almost like an automatic response where I'm trying to guard or protect or shield or something. And she has to remind me to try to relax my body because I don't want to hold all of that tension in my shoulders. It's a protection mechanism that's keeping me from fully being able to walk through the process of not reliving the experience, but reprocessing the experience, to sort of stand on the outside of it and view it as it's happening, but not being a part of it again. Anyway, that's kind of a side note, but just to know that, um, those traumatic experiences that have gone unhealed are in some way being triggered. And one of the ways that people deal with that is to use or overconsume alcohol or pornography or adultery, or this idea that I'm just not happy and I need to go find myself. So that's one of the things. The other thing, honestly, is just not having any truth to replace that. And for me, that truth is having a relationship with God and knowing what His Word says. So without having that knowledge, without having spent time in His Word or in prayer or in relationship with Him, listening to different teaching and hearing the truth, I didn't have anything to replace all of those lies with. I was just kind of stuck with whatever had happened to me and what I believed about myself. And I think those two things, that unhealed stuff and not having the alternative or the truth, which is God, to replace the lies with, not having relationship with Him, those are the two things that I think make addiction or alcoholism a solution for people. And so while I understand that, this is why I say that it's not about you. It is overflowing and spilling into your life, but they are not choosing this as a way to hurt you, even if they say they are. Because that can absolutely happen. Well, you're the reason I drink. Well, you're the reason I have to do this. That is deflection and is not representative of truth. Not at all. That's garbage. But they don't know how to take responsibility for their decisions and what has become of their life. So, what I wanted to say, I wrote something out. Let me see if I can get through this. It says, Looks can be deceiving. So, like we talked about those two pictures, if you looked at those two pictures of me on the surface, you would think probably they're just photographs of me and they're nice pictures and whatever. My point in really showing you those two things was to say that whatever you are seeing in your spouse that appears to be like, oh, they have it all together. Yes, they're struggling with this, but everything else in their life is okay. Let me tell you a story. That is not the truth. This is probably contributing and driving their choices more than you recognize. You're seeing it where it's showing up in how it affects you. And I get that. But if you started to sort of pay attention, you would see other places in their life. And maybe you already do. Maybe you notice the kind of relationship they have with their children or lack thereof. Maybe you notice poor performance at work or inability to maintain steady employment. Maybe you notice they once had passions, creative side, whatever that looked like, and they're just not into those things anymore. So, and maybe they are. Maybe they are spending lots and lots of time trying to prove that all is well. It is all smoke and mirrors to take focus away from their problem because they don't want to admit. It's so hard to admit that you have a problem and that you need help. It is so hard to come to that place. It is incredibly difficult to recognize that you're not in control and to say those words, I need help. You know that people are disappointed. You know that they're right, that you do have a problem. But you don't want to acknowledge that because you have no idea how you're going to cope without it. So I do encourage you guys to remember that. And if you are seeing things in their life and thinking, well, they're happy. Seems like they have it all together. Yeah, they have a problem with this or they have an addiction issue with that, but everything else seems to be going okay. Looks are deceiving, and it's very intentional on their part to make you believe that all is well and that there's not really a problem. Yeah, so during that time in my life, I worked very hard to look put together, act fine, to make it appear that everything was okay. That it wasn't really as bad as everybody was saying it was. But the truth is that I was really just kind of full of myself. I needed to believe those things. Because if I, for a second, allowed myself to believe that I really couldn't hold it together, then I would have to admit that I needed help. And so really, I'm not saying any of this to be discouraging. I'm sure that many of you recognize what I'm saying as truth and what you're seeing in your spouse that is currently walking in that. I don't want you to be discouraged. I think I have shared before, and I'll just share briefly again if there's anybody that is new to listening. I spent 8 years in active alcoholism, and probably the last 3 or 4 years of that were the worst. And I wasn't seeking God. I wasn't actively struggling with trying to quit. I was full force living my life, doing whatever I wanted to, drinking when I wanted to, and serving Melissa. That's what I was doing. And I do think that there were people praying for me, but certainly not actively, often, daily praying over me. They were far too busy being affected and concerned about how they were being affected because of my drinking. And I don't say that to be harsh to you guys. I know that their lives are spilling over and affecting you. But all of the um, talks that you're having with them, all of the condemnation that you're putting on to them, all of the can't you just make this choice for me? Don't you understand what you're doing? Why can't you see that this is hurting us? All of that is only stoking the fire. That's all it's doing. It's stoking the fire. Let's be honest. If they could logically reason through that they have a problem and need help, don't you think they would do it? But they can't. So being constantly reminded of that, or I don't want to use the word nagging, but the constant reminder that they are disappointing you again is not bringing them closer. It's not bringing them closer. My encouragement to you is if you have done that, and certainly I understand why you would want to do that. It's frustrating. It's overwhelming. It's unfair. It's just, it's not right. So I understand wanting to say those things. I'm going to encourage you to stop doing that. I'm going to encourage you to recognize that your enemy is not your addicted spouse. That's not your enemy. They are behaving in what I called survival mode. And what they need is something they don't have. And that is relationship and surrender to the Lord. Not another reminder that what they're doing is hurting you or hurting the family or hurting the marriage. They are not in a place where that is a motivating factor to cause them to stop. Most of them know they have a problem. Most of them know that they're walking in destruction, and yet they still cannot make the logical choice to step out of that. So when you hear me say that, do not be discouraged. Switch your focus. Shift your focus with intention away from fighting with your spouse and over to the enemy. And by that I mean recognize who your real enemy is. The word says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. The enemy is your enemy. And if you can switch your focus over there and pray the truth of God's word over your spouse and love them for the person that God created them to be, despite the challenges that they have. That was the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, that addiction is a symptom. Now, I recognize that it's a very loud, in your face, overwhelming symptom. But it is just that. And sort of the way that I think about this is, the behaviors, the words, the activities, all of the things that I did when I was lost in alcoholism, I don't do those things anymore. Those things happened because I was intoxicated. I am not saying they weren't hurtful to people around me. I am just simply saying they didn't define me. They were part of the alcoholism. I don't behave the way that I used to. I don't do the things that I used to do that were destructive and, you know, uh, I hate talking about all of that, but in any event, you know what I'm talking about. If you're walking through addiction with your spouse right now, those things that you're like, how could they behave this way? How could they say these things? Those things. I behaved that way because of the alcoholism. I don't do those things now because that is gone. But not just because the alcoholism is gone. It's because I have a relationship with the Lord. Because I want to live in relationship with Him. I have a repentant heart before Him. I want to please Him. My spouse does not have to tell me not to act a certain way now. We would not have to have those conversations were we together. Because I don't behave that way now. Those were all just part of that addiction. And on a deeper level, addiction is just a symptom of the underlying lack of identity that your spouse has. If you want to make an impact in their life, begin to pray the truth over them. Begin to declare the truth over them. Begin to call out the truth in them. You may not have relationship with them enough that you can be that overt, but you can look for opportunities to praise and bring up and magnify the God-given qualities and characteristics that your spouse was made with. Those things speak hope to someone when they're lost in that, because they recognize that you see beyond the garbage. You see beyond the behavior. You see them. You see them. And they will gravitate toward that. It will give them hope. Okay. So let me go and look at, I know I had a question that somebody asked in the group. So let me try to get down there to that. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through here to get to that. Okay, this person asks, did you become sober before your husband left or after? The answer is a little complicated. I guess that depends on how you define left. So just to quickly recap that, I cried out to God. My husband and I were still together, and I cried out to God because I knew something was happening in my husband. Essentially, I knew that he was having some kind of inappropriate relationship with a friend of ours. And I cried out to the Lord to deliver me from alcoholism because I knew that I could not fight for our marriage and be an alcoholic at the same time. And the totality of conversations at that time were about my drinking. There was no discussion about any inappropriate behavior that he was displaying in relationship to this other woman. It was all focused on me. So my desperate cry to the Lord was, please, you have to take this away from me so that I can fight for my marriage. So that happened. And then about a month later, he physically left our home. He lived at home for about a month after I got sober. And it was a rough month. And I know we have talked some about what that looks like coming out of that. I didn't have an issue with struggling to want to drink, but I certainly was not able to emotionally, maturely process what was happening in the wake of being sober and realizing my husband is having an affair. So I was very volatile. Even though I absolutely had a surrendered heart before the Lord, my mouth and my brain, my mind had not yet caught up to that. So it was an incredibly challenging month. And to this day, I believe that my husband he could not stomach the pressure of watching me work out my own salvation, however messy that was, and continue having this affair with our friend while living in our house. So the answer, I guess, is a little complicated. He lived with me for a month after I got sober, um, and then he physically left, but he was already having an affair when I got sober. So I don't know if that answers the question or not. The second part of this person's question was my husband supportive once I was sober? I would love to say yes. And I think in his heart of hearts, he is, um, I don't even know the right word to use. I think in his heart of hearts, he is happy that I am sober. Um, but I do not believe that anybody thought that I was going to get sober or stay sober. So when you use the word, was he supportive of me once I was sober? No. And the way that I would define being supportive in that situation, like he continued and to this day would continue to consume alcohol in front of me, blame me for every possible thing, rightly or wrongly, that I did while I was in alcoholism. Like I don't know, to me, it doesn't seem as if there's actual forgiveness. And that's for him to take up between him and the Lord. And one of the reasons that I talk with you guys is because I recognize that you are standing in that place where he stood for so long. And I don't want to see your heart become bitter and hardened toward what you see as an impossible situation. It certainly is not impossible. It is very hard. It is very challenging. And I am not minimizing that at all. But it's not impossible. God absolutely delivered me, and I have been sober for 6 years and 7 months. And I have not struggled. I have not gone back to that. I have not relapsed. I have not any of that. So it is absolutely possible. For some people, it will not work that way. Maybe they will need to go to a treatment facility. Maybe they will, taper down. That's between them and Jesus. I just know that it's possible to live on the other side of what could have absolutely taken my life from me, much less my marriage, much less, my family. It could have taken my life. And I know that you're still walking in that. I don't want to see you guys misunderstand. Like, I'm not saying you don't have a right to feel hurt about the choices that they're making and how that's impacting your life. Certainly, it's painful. Absolutely. But I don't want you to live in bitterness. I don't want you to live in the misunderstanding that this is somehow about you. It isn't. And I think that's what happened to my husband. He could not rescue me. He could not save me. And he took that as failure. He understood that as failure, that he could not save me. And of course, that's not his place and wasn't his job, because that is for God alone. I do not think that I have any other questions. Let me see if I can pop over to the chat part of this and see if if I can get my computer to work. I don't see any other questions. I can stop recording if anybody wants to talk. Or you can type in the chat if you have a question, and I'll try to answer your question in there. So basically today, just to sum up while you guys are thinking on if you have any other questions, just to sum up, the point of today was, excuse me, to make sure that you guys are not looking at circumstances, you're not looking at what you can see and thinking that all is well, based on a braggadocious attitude from your spouse, or what they're telling you, oh, my life is so great and blah, blah, blah. Like, looks can be deceiving. So just, this comes down to, it's a heart issue. It's between, your spouse and the Lord, and we cannot be focused on the circumstances, whether they're good or bad. We cannot live in that. All of that is subject to change. Every single bit of that. I mean, in a moment. Part of what I was going to say earlier was that I was not pursuing a relationship with God. I was not pursuing quitting or tapering back, or I wasn't pursuing any of those things. I was literally 6 beers in and cried out to God drunk. So, and 5 minutes before that, you couldn't have told me that was going to happen. I just finally reached a place of desperation and decided, even in my drunken state, there's only one way this gets helped. God, I need your help. I cannot do this. No matter how much I want to not do this, I can't not do it. So help me to not do this. Help me so that I can fight for my marriage. Now, I look back on that now because I have grown in relationship with the Lord and realized that there was somewhat of a selfish motive there. I wanted my marriage restored. I wanted my husband back. And I thought, I'll just use God to get that. You know what? He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He knew what was going to happen. He knew that was going to be the turning point in my life. He knew that. So he'll take it. I don't think he's offended at all. I think he was finally like, yes, she's surrendering. She's going to let me in. She's going to let me help her. Yes. I think he'll take that all day long. And so I really, tearing up just because to me that's so amazing. As I know who I was before this. I know how I behaved. Let me say it that way. I know how I behaved before God set me free. And it was not pretty. Not pretty at all. But God didn't hold that against me. He took my surrender and allowed me to come back to his heart. And it has been hard and messy and rebuilding and a struggle just to navigate, relationship with the Lord, not on his end, but just me. We talk about that dying to self. The word says that we have to take up our cross and follow him. That taking up our cross and following him is so challenging. And it's an everyday choice. So, and I know that, you guys are committed to the Lord first. And as a part of what he has placed in your life, you are looking at walking through a marriage with a spouse that is addicted. And that has its own unique challenges. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible to walk through this. I think most important is for you guys to be certain that you are keeping this in proper perspective, that above all, you're seeking Him. You're getting your value, your identity, your worthiness from the Lord, from what His Word says, and that you're not placing your purpose, your happiness, your walk in life in the hands of a person, namely your spouse, whether they're addicted or not, whether they have an addiction issue or not. People are not intended to fill that place in our life. And it's not that people can't add enjoyment to our life and help us with purpose, like fulfilling purpose. And I'm not saying any of that. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Of course, God designed our marriages and wanted us to enjoy living life with our spouses. Of course He did. But they are not in charge. Our spouses are not in charge of our value, of our identity, by what they say or don't say, by what they do or don't do. And I think we're wise to recognize that if we are feeling like they are, if somehow we're waking up thinking we're going to have a good day or a bad day based on the choices of other people, including our spouses, our hearts are in the wrong place. They're not in charge of that. We get to decide how we will respond. And I know that that can be hard to hear. One of the things that my counselor talks to me about, and I love this because it really shifted my perspective. For many years in my life, because of the unhealed trauma, I learned to react to a situation. So somebody said something, or somebody did something, or somebody didn't say something, or didn't do something that I expected. And I learned to react to those situations. When the truth is, I needed to be able to respond to those situations. And the analogy that she uses, my counselor uses, is that they call them first responders, not first reactors. Those first responders are people who are showing up in the middle of chaos, in the middle of potentially life-threatening, dangerous situations. And their training is causing them to choose how to respond appropriately, to bring those situations to manageability, to bring life and health and healing and hope in those situations. What if they showed up, they're there, they've got the t-shirt and the badge, and they're just reacting. They don't really know what to do. They're just reacting to that situation. That's not helpful. There's no plan in that. There's no purpose in that. So I'm learning how to be in my own life with my own circumstances and situations. I'm learning how to be a first responder in how I deal with situations that come up rather than just reacting. Maybe that's a helpful analogy for you guys as you're walking through this, to not look at yourself as a reactor, reacting based off of what is or isn't happening with your spouse, but rather spending time in the Word, being sure of your own identity, knowing who God made your spouse to be. And when those situations that are challenging and chaotic and destructive come up, you're responding based on the knowledge that you have inside of you, based on what the Holy Spirit is speaking to your heart about that situation, about that moment. You're responding rather than reacting. So you're in the Word, you're in prayer, you're spending time listening to teaching. You're not drawing your identity, your value, your purpose, your happiness from your spouse, specifically or exclusively in this season. You're not doing that. You are getting the truth and being filled up so that you can give from a place of overflow, from the knowledge that already exists, from the truth that already exists inside of you. That's how you go about pulling out that gold in them. When they're in those lucid moments, when their heart is vulnerable and they're sharing with you and all of that. Never take advantage of those moments. Never, never, never take advantage of those moments. If you don't see yourself as the person that they trusted in that moment, and you flip that to, yeah, I've been telling you this for years, or yeah, I told you this was going to happen. Don't do that. I know it's tempting, but don't do that. You can say that to God later in your private time if you want to do that. But don't ever say that to your spouse. If they're being that vulnerable with you, if they're struggling and they're being that vulnerable with you, you have to let God speak through you in that moment. It's not a time to process how you felt about it. There can be a time for that, but that's not the time for it. So anyway, I'm going to look in the chat. I don't think I see any other questions in here. Excuse me. Let me try to go up. I'm going to try to go to the other chat to see if I can see anything in there. And I don't think I do. So I am going to close up the recording portion of this for today. I thank you all for joining and for listening. I'm going to hang out for a minute after if you have any questions and want to say anything. So thank you again, and we will talk again next time.